I'm trying to do a sound check. How do I sound out there? If anybody's listening now, but give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great, thanks, Lori.
Good.
Hey, also, if someone else could, there's this. I've had complaints about the sound quality. Raise your hand if the sound quality is bad. All right. We're going to get started in just 5 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Thanks, Yolanda. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. Okay. Hey, we're going to get started about 1 minute, everyone. Nope, let's get started. Okay. Hey, thanks for joining us. We've got a good crowd on hand today. We do like to make these interactive, and so if you have some of your experience to offer or a question, feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute you. I've been told that the audio is coming through well and clear. We've had some problems with audio quality. If that is not the case, if you could raise your hand. Okay. And let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is taking a look at discrepancies in data between FAPIIS, Federal Awardee Performance Integrity and Information System. Well, let's see, what does FAPIIS mean? We'll get to that in a minute. So the agenda for today, we're going to look at the FAR and the difference between termination for cause and termination for default. And then we're going to look at what the FAR has to say about FAPIIS. The next chunk of slides is going to be on what data is actually in FAPIIS. There's more to it than just terminate for cause and terminate for default records. All right, then we're going to get into false negatives and false positives. So for this webinar, we're defining false negatives as the data record saying that an award has been terminated for cause or default is not in FAPIIS, but it is in FPDS NG. So therefore, it looks like the vendor has let's say, a clean record in FAPIIS, but in fact, if you looked in FPDS NG, they would have one or more terminations for cause or default. Then the reverse of that is false positives. Those are more serious, in my judgment. I'd be interested in what you think. That is, an award is identified in FAPIIS as being terminated for cause or default, but then when you go look at the award in FPDS NG, it's not. It was either terminated for convenience, or it's simply still an active award, or there are other cases where you simply can't find the award. But in any event, what's in FAPIIS, there's no tie-in to what's in FPDS NG, false positive. Then we're going to look at a FedDataCheck report that lists these negatives and positives. It shows you the delta, the differences between FPDS NG and FAPIIS, and a review. Okay, some definitions. We just went over false negative, false positive. FAPIIS, Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity Information System. And here is this was a definition supplied by California OIG. I provided the link. I was just Googling it. I thought it was a good definition. It's a database that has been established to track contractor misconduct and performance. Seems like a good one to me. Terminate for cause, terminate for default. There are some differences that we'll get into on that. These definitions are here for you to refer to if you're using our, thanks Dorothy on the sound. Okay. I'm having trouble responding to questions, so there we go. All right. Let's start out with a poll. Okay. Also, who am I? I'm Bob Harford, Vice President, Business Intelligence Products with Potomac Wave. I lead the FedDataCheck team, which I think all or virtually all of you are familiar with. We do offer, we don't, but we give a certificate for a CLP point after this webinar. To get that certificate, you do need to stay on for the length of the webinar or up until about an hour's length, which is what I think this one is going to be. You don't have to stay at the end where we discuss myself, FedDataCheck, and Potomac Wave. That's the same every time. But you know, stay to the end of the technical, the acquisition part of the webinar. It helps if you keep the screen share on your main screen and respond to the poll questions. So when you do that, we give you a certificate, something called an interest rating, and many of our agencies then accept that for a CLP point. And you can also, irrespective of whether it's done on a more or less automatic basis, you can always submit it to FedDataCheck and have it reviewed for approval for a CLP point. I haven't heard any problems in terms of people not getting a CLP point, so I assume that's going well. Okay, let's do a poll here. And have you ever entered a termination for cause or termination for default record in FAPIIS? With, excuse me, in the FAPIIS module in the CPARS system, which is where you would do it. Okay, that gives us a, so not many. A few have, and those of you who have done it, boy, if you can offer your, raise your hand, offer your experience, add to what I'm saying, or offer a different view, a viewpoint as to different, or a different, correct me if I'm wrong. That'd be great. Okay, but so we have a few out there who've gone through this process. Thanks, Melinda. Okay. Melinda, were you raising your hand for a comment or?
I know, I did. I just wanted to say that if you're a contract specialist and you do have to report a termination to FAPIIS, it's not hard at all. It's very easy. It's just a matter of entering the contract number, the DUNS, and some very basic information, and it should be done shortly after the termination has been issued. And for those that don't have access to FAPIIS, you have to get in contact with your CPARS point of contact at your agency, and they will have to grant you that access into FAPIIS to be able to report terminations, and that's not very difficult at all.
Got it. Yeah, thanks, Melinda. Yeah, I spoke with the acquisition expert. I'm not sure she's on here, so I won't mention her name, but she's certainly very knowledgeable whenever I ask her a question, and she said the same thing. A lot of the information that goes from CPARS over to FAPIIS is done, you know, you fill in a few things and then they push the data from CPARS over to NAVC, which is I think a bit like what you're saying. Fill in a few basic information, hit the button, data goes from CPARS to FAPIIS. Thanks, Melinda. All right. Termination, let's go through just a couple, get into this distinction between termination for default and termination for cause. I use termination, terminate, terminated. I use those interchangeably. Termination for default is in the FAR, means the exercise of the government's right to completely or partially terminate a contract because of the contractor's actual or anticipated failure to perform its contractual obligations. In the data dictionary, all it says is it's a code E, terminate for default, complete or partial, and there is no elaboration on what the term means. And I'm going to say most people use termination for default wrong. And you tell me when we get through this slide here if you agree with that. Termination for cause, that's not in the definitions of FAR 2.1, but it means the same thing as termination for default. The distinction being that termination for cause is used for acquisitions that use FAR Part 12, acquisition of commercial items. So if you acquired a commercial item, then you're going to be using termination for cause. If it's a not commercial item, you're going to be using termination for default. Again, the FPDS NG data dictionary, they don't elaborate on what the term means. Most get it right. Okay, why am I saying most get it wrong, most get it right? I mean, why do I say most people get termination for default wrong and most people get termination for cause right? Well, let's go. Let me do one more on this slide. So here's my recommendation. If the reason for mod is E, terminate for default, complete or partial, then the commercial item acquisition procedures should be D, commercial item procedures not used. Similarly, if the reason for mod is E, terminate for cause, then you should be able to look down the FPDS NG transaction to the commercial item acquisition procedures field and see A, commercial item. There are two other options for commercial item acquisition procedures, but they are rarely used. One is obsolete, which is code C, and then the code B is used when you make an acquisition in defense against or recovery from a nuclear, biological, radiological attack. Okay, so I looked in the data. And here's what I saw. So for FY19, for civilian transactions, there were 79 transactions that had a termination for default. And of those 79, 28 used commercial item procedures not used. So that's good. That's the right pairing, default with commercial item procedures not used. But when you look at termination for, let's see, I got the wrong. Termination for, all right, let me see, am I getting confused here? Yeah, the red is the problem. Let me start again. So we got a termination for default, and 48 of the 80, so over half, it was for an award for a commercial item. So that's not right. Less than half the time it was a commercial item procedures not used. Now, when it's terminated for cause, that is, there are a few cases where it was tied to a non-commercial item, but not many. So this is the one that's giving people an issue. Hey, you acquired a commercial item, but the reason for mod is terminate for default. Let's go see if we can actually look at one of those and make sure that this data is correct. I'll throw that down there. All right, let's look at the first one. This one, mod 2. So I'll go to FPDS. I'll plug in that PID colon number. You can just do the number, but PID colon works, really zeroes you in on it. And what did we say it was? P2. All right, we got FY19, we got to terminate for default. Now we said that that's for if you use cause, if it was Part 12 commercial item, default if it's non-commercial. If I come down here to the competition section, it's for a commercial item. So that's the mismatch. which brings me to poll number 2. Is any of that significant? Maybe, you know, to really be precise, you have to match up the commercial item acquisition procedures with the type of termination, but does it make any difference in the real world? Give it a few more seconds here. Okay, about half, roughly. Half said yes, half said no. Okay, yeah, it would be great if someone could raise their hand and say, let's start with why it doesn't really matter. We're just splitting hairs as to whether you use default or cause. Anybody want to elaborate on that? Okay. Dorothy, why is that splitting hairs? Who cares?
I think it's only for auditing purposes, so you can look and see the reason.
Okay.
Otherwise, it just doesn't really make any sense.
The vendor's still terminated in both cases, and the vendor is still
Exactly. The
terminated
end
in a
result
very,
is the same.
Yep. And it's a black mark on the vendor, really. I mean, let's be candid. I mean, okay, thanks, Dorothy. Can anybody offer a reason why it's not splitting hairs? It's actually, Dorothy mentioned auditing purposes, but is there something I'm missing where it's actually significant, whether it's you use cause or default? I mean, yeah, terminate for cause versus default. Okay, well, if somebody thinks of something, raise your hand. Looks like it's hard to come up with a reason. Okay, let's look at the FAR and FAPIIS. Incidentally, when you see this blue and underline, oh, wait a minute. Laura, is there a reason why we should be concerned whether it's cause?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Yep, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
I think that the termination for default is when you are with the non-commercial. However, the termination for cause is similar to a default, except it is for commercial.
Right. But other than that distinction, in line with I forgot her name already. They both do, of course. It's the same result for the vendor.
Correct.
And it's the same result for the vendor in terms of having a black mark on their record.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Okay, in FAPIIS, here's FAR 91046A1. Before awarding a contract in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold, the contractor shall review the performance and integrity information available in FAPIIS. And in a little bit farther down in 9104-6, the key point here is FAPIIS contains data going back 5 years. It's a 5-year period in FAPIIS. Now we're going to get into just what that 5-year period means. Is that the end date of the contract, the start date of the contract, some other date? We're going to get into that, but 5 years is yeah, I think you really only need to keep that in mind. To put that another way, if the vendor was terminated for default 8 times in, what are we in now? In calendar year 2013, you'd go over and look at that vendor's record in FAPIIS, and there would be nothing. at least as far as cause and default was. So if they got terminated 8 times in 2013, no terminations for cause or default since then, they'd have a clean record in FAPIIS in those 2 areas. Okay, and here's a key point, and this goes into other. If you've been in some of our past webinars, I call it derogatory information. If the vendor has marked that they have a federal tax delinquency, if they've marked that they are currently under indictment, have been convicted of a felony, first thing to do would be to talk to them, request additional information per this far. And one of the reasons for that, based on our experience over these last, let's say, 4 or 5 months, is that the vendor often checks the wrong box in SAM. Or there could be a mistake somewhere else. I guess FAPIIS, they wouldn't be checking a wrong box in SAM. Something else, the CO would have to be involved. But making sure that the data is accurate that you're reading online and in SAM and in FAPIIS is a good step. Talking to the vendor is a good step in that regard. Okay, what data is in FAPIIS? So here's this graphic, here's the link here in FAPIIS. And you got 3 things. You have their answers to 52209-7. Are they a big vendor in terms of do they have active federal awards with a total value greater than 10 million? And have they within the last 5 years been subject to a criminal, civil, or administrative proceeding? So you got these 2 answers by the vendor here. They tie to FAR 5222097. The other 3-legged stool in FAPIIS is FAPIIS pulls in any debarment data that's in SAM for the vendor. And then the third stool is, let's call it other derogatory information, such as termination for cause, termination for default. You also can get into things as that we're going to get into administrative agreement. Maybe they've had an EPA violation and they promised to tidy up their environmental impact. Is one area that we'll see. So there are other, I keep using the term derogatory records in FAPIIS besides termination for cause or default. But we'll see that this is the lion's share, that over 90% in this category tied to termination for cause or termination for default. All right, FAR 50, we said, so we got a 3-legged stool. We got 5222097 in FAPIIS. We got SAM data in FAPIIS. We got termination for cause or default and other similar records in FAPIIS. Let's take a look at Honeywell. So I will go over to www.fapis.gov. I'll put in Honeywell's 9-digit number. I'll hit search. And here's their answers to 5222097. Do you have active awards greater than 10 million? Honeywell says yes. Honeywell International. You've had trouble with the law in the last 5 years? Honeywell says no. Now, if you're a smaller vendor and you didn't have to answer these 52297, this would not show up. Now, I'm going to have to check myself on that. If you do, I only checked Honeywell. I have seen other cases where this is not shown. I think if it's no, it just simply does not show up. But we'll double check that. If you do answer yes to one of these, then 5222097 does show up. That's my understanding. Okay, let's go here. let's go look at, well, let's keep going through here. Honeywell did say, and then they probably did this by mistake, which we talked about, which is first thing to do when you see some of this derogatory information is contact the vendor and make sure that they actually meant what they filled out in SAM or elsewhere. But let's look at 522095 as AIC for Honeywell's. So here's SAM. Here's FAPIIS. They're saying there no problems with the law, and they're more than 10 million in active awards. Let's go to SAM, sam.gov. I'll hit search. I'll put in Honeywell's DUNS. And I'm going to look at the other parts of SAM that Honeywell has filled out to ensure you, the buyers, that they are a responsible contractor and therefore someone the federal government can do business with. I'm going to click on reps and certs. And I'm going to come down to FAR 522095. It takes a while for this to stop spinning. Let's see, there it did. 522095. Here, it's got to be by mistake. Maybe not. Maybe Honeywell's got something going on. 522095. Let's go make sure it's Honeywell. Yep. They checked here. 2095A1IC. They are presently indicted, criminally or civilly charged by a government entity with the commission of an offense enumerated at A1IB right above here. So this is commission of fraud. Bad stuff. So in this part of SAM 522095, they said, yep, we are. And yet in FAPIIS, they're saying no. So what I thought then when I was going through this was, well, let me go look at what FAR 522097 says in SAM. Let's go look for that. So I'll just do a Control F, 52209-7, and you can click through that. I'll save you the suspense. It doesn't exist. You're not going to find 522097 responses in SAM. You see them in FAPIIS, but not in SAM. You see a similar one, 522095, regarding criminal conduct, and there's actually one in 20911 too. So it does seem to be an inconsistency there by Honeywell. So why is FAR 522097 not visible in SAM, particularly when there is a discrepancy between SAM and FAPIIS? Okay, let's see why that's the case. So if I click on, let's do that search again. Pretend I start again. I click search. I put in Honeywell's DUNS number. I click on view details. I click on core data. And I scroll down. Registrants in SAM respond. No, that's not the one. This one. Registrants in the SAM respond to proceedings questions in accordance with FAR 52097, 2099, and this thing. Their responses are not displayed in SAM. They are sent to FAPIIS.gov for display as applicable. So that's why sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. I think the test is whether they answer yes to one of those two, then they'll show it to you. One of those two being the first one being more than 10 million, second one, trouble with the law. Okay, that was a long winded thing. It's not really why this webinar is about, but I just wanted to go through cover the three-legged stool of what is in FAPIIS. Any questions or any comments? Okay. All right. All right. Let's go to the second stool. Second stool was debarment data. So let's take a look at a debarred vendor. See how that looks. So if I'm in SAM, I will click on search, and I'm going to have to type in this DUNS number. Search DUNS number 966572682. Let's copy that. Search. All right, I got a purple. Purple's bad, Sam. Green, IT Systems Group, they're ineligible. Proceedings completed. They've gone through their debarment proceedings. It's done. They're debarred. Oftentimes it is for a period of time, but it can be indefinite. They got a ways to go. They got years to go before they are not debarred or eligible for reinstatement. Let's take a look at green IT and FAPIIS. And there you go. SAM exclusion data. There's the SAM debarment record. Second stool. First one were those two questions on the size and the criminal problems. Second leg of the stool is debarment data in FAPIIS. Third leg of the stool is what we're here for, which is termination for cause or default. Okay, so how does this work? So, and those who have done this, I know we had a chat there earlier. Double check me on this. Elaborate. Raise your hand. Let's go through a hypothetical example. Then we're going to get into some real examples. Acme Inc. Was given an award. Let's say FY19. They get terminated for cause. A corresponding mod for that award is entered into Interior's contract writing system, documenting the termination for cause. That mod is released, is finalized, and goes through the validations, is released to FPDS NG with the data element 12C reason for mod value X, terminate for cause. A final CPARS evaluation is entered into NAVC CPARS, presumably with an E unsatisfactory rating. The CO then initiates the FAPIIS module from within CPARS, enters in, fills in those couple fields, the DUNS number, a few things other that, I'm sorry, I forgot that person's name who walked us through it a little bit at the beginning of this webinar. But anyway, so the FAPIIS input module from within CPARS is initiated. A couple simple fields are filled out, hit enter, and the appropriate data from CPARS is then pushed over to FAPIIS. And here's a key point. Per this FAR regulations, agencies have 3 calendar days to get terminations for cause default through the chain reaction, through the chain of events, and into FAPIIS. Therefore, any terminations for cause or default that were signed in FY19 should absolutely be in FAPIIS now. And we'll see if that's the case in a little bit. Did I miss anything out there, anybody? Okay. Let me do poll number 3 here. Let's think about when you're doing a assessment of contractor responsibility and you do look in FAPIIS and find a terminations for cause or default. When does this, I see it's distributing the poll. Hopefully you'll see it in just a minute. When do you think, well, wow, I don't know about this one? And I suppose one thing I left out of this poll was, if someone had one termination for cause of default and they had 80,000 awards, say it's a huge company, that might be a heck of a lot different than someone who had one and had 4 awards. So maybe it's a ratio between termination for cause of default and how many awards they've received. All right, let me close that up and distribute the results. So that's interesting to me. As someone who is with a contractor and others, you don't want these on your record. Wow, 1. Don't have 1. That's good. I'm not saying don't do that. But that's. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't share that. I'm sorry. Here we go. So the vast majority of you on here saying you don't want to see terminations for cause of default on a vendor's record, which is obviously understandable. Just 1. You don't get to. It's such a serious situation. You don't want it to come up ever. It's based on that poll. Thanks. Okay. Let me make sure I got my screen showing again. All right. And we're doing good on time. What other data is in FAPIIS? If you look at this, I looked in FAPIIS and I downloaded, again, we had the 3-legged stool. We had those answers to 2097. How big are you? Are you involved with the law? You got the SAM department. And these other records on that 3rd-legged stool, terminations for cause of default represent over 90% of the records in the third leg of that stool. But there are other records in there, such as administrative agreement. The SDO may also decide to enter in an administrative compliance agreement. These agreements document remedial measures taken to prevent reoccurrence and often include outside independent reviews, audits by consultants. They generally last 3 years. Let's take a look at one. Okay, so here's Concrete Applied Technologies. They do have an administrative agreement. So they're not terminated for cause of default, but they've done something where they need to make a serious course correction. And you can read about it here. A lot of times I see, this is with the transportation. I haven't looked at it in detail what these administrative agreements are. Maybe some of you know, but a lot of times when I come down here to the agency, I see EPA when I was looking at them. So I'm wondering if it involves, they're not working with their water runoff and sewage system or something, something related to the EPA that they would like them to pay more attention to. And you can see the administrative agreements are the 3rd most after cause and default. And then here's another interesting one: subcontractor payment issues. You gotta, if you're particularly if you're in construction or doing something else, or you have another contract with subcontractors, particularly the SBA, right, has made it's been in the news a lot. Pay your subcontractors on time. If not, you could find yourself in FAPIIS. Let's take a look. Okay, here they go. Subcontractor payment issues with Axon International. They got a couple records in FAPIIS. Here's one by Interior. There's the contact. they do give the opportunity for the vendor to respond. So they're saying the subcontractor was paid in full. Interior is saying here they didn't do it. If there's a record in here, if someone from Interior wants to raise their hand, that would be great. You know, something happened here with a subcontractor payment that that Axon got a record all the way into FAPIIS in relation to it. So more into FAPIIS besides termination for cause of default, although again, those are the most. All right, let's getting into the meat of this here. A false negative. A termination for cause of default is not in FAPIIS, but it is in FPDS NG. Okay, remember, FAPIIS is supposed to cover the prior 5-year period based on when the termination for cause of default was entered into FAPIIS. So that's key. It's not based on the sign date in FPDS NG. It's not based for the termination for cause mod. It's not based on the effective date or anything else in FPDS NG. The 5-year period clicks when the record was entered into FAPIIS. And if you're following the rules in the FAR, you were supposed to get into the FAPIIS within 3 days of the termination for cause of default action. So let's 3 days of the sign date then. So they should be synonymous, but the 5-year period keys off of FAPIIS. And remember, 3 calendar days. So any termination for cause of default from FY19 should be in FAPIIS, unless you really signed the transaction late. But if you're in FY19, you should be in there. So let's take a look at this one. Okay, and it's typically the last record, last mod. Doesn't have to be, but that's, okay, I got a termination for cause signed in May of 2019, a long time ago. That's Justice Department. I'm not, incidentally, I really don't try to single out any individual or department. Let's get the DUNS number. Okay, so that's 6 months ago. It's well within the 5-year period. Let's take a look at SAS Industries in FAPIIS. Home, search. All right, I'm gonna make award to SAS Industries. Okay, they do have a termination. They got 2 terminations for cause. Remember this one here, the PID starts with 15. The contracting department is Justice. PID starts with 15. All right, let's look at these 2. I don't see any PID starting with 15. And I don't see anything reported in 2019. Let me take a look at one more. You see, I think obviously you see what the problem is there. All right, Pravosta International Software International Energy Department, terminate for cause. Let's come down and look at these people in this vendor in FAPIIS. They got 3, but none of the PID that we were looking at for energy. Now I've also seen it. I'll maybe I should have come up with a better example, but you'll also see it where they'll terminate. They have it terminated for cause of default in FPDS NG. You come into FAPIIS and it's a clean record. This might surprise you, but I looked at this carefully. How many false negatives are there? 60% of the FY19 terminations for cause of default by civilian agencies are not in FAPIIS. 132 out of 211. That's when I checked a couple days ago. You have less than half of a chance of actually seeing the termination for cause of default in FAPIIS. They're not making it over there. Over half the time, they're not making it all through that chain reaction of contract writing system, the FPDS NG, the CPARS evaluation, to the FAPIIS input module and on into FAPIIS. Does that surprise anybody? Anybody have a comment? Is that what your experience is? Or I think most people were aware that FAPIIS, given that there is some manual effort in there, particularly involving the CPARS evaluation, that things can slip through the cracks. But I have to say, I was surprised at the extent of it. We went through this webinar a couple days ago, but I hope you would give this a try. A better way to check is to send an email to vendorreport@fedDataCheck.net. Vendor report, if you can see that. Vendorreport@fedDataCheck.net. Put the DUNS number in the subject line, and we'll send you all. We'll give you a report on all derogatory information, department records, as well as all termination for cause and default records that are in FPDS NG as well as FAPIIS. So you can compare side by side the data in FPDS NG and FAPIIS. So we think that's a better way to do it rather than manually plugging in DUNS numbers into FAPIIS and hoping that all the data is there. All right. Any comments so far? I did have one more poll. Let me see what that. How about this one? Given we just saw a lot of false negatives, or we saw 2, does it matter? Interestingly, we saw just 1 termination for cause of default. It's a big problem. But does it matter if you got terminated for cause of default by 3 different departments? Or let's say you got, let's you take 2, given you based on your last response. If you're getting terminated by more than 1 department, is that significant? So the point being, different acquisition groups are evaluating you to be seriously deficient, and you're fulfilling your obligations. Okay, let me close that, share it. So it's about a half-half, 50-50. If any comments, anybody want to share their thoughts as to why terminations for cause or default with multiple departments does or does not matter? I mean, if you got terminated for cause or default by agriculture 3 times, obviously that's horrendous. Is it even more horrendous if it was once by agriculture, once by interior, once by commerce? It's about half of you are split on that question. Interesting question, I think. All right, here I put this in red because I think this is a particularly serious discrepancy between FAPIIS and FPDS NG. The vendor is identified in FAPIIS as being associated with a termination for cause default, when in fact they're not. Let's take a look at this DUNS number here in FAPIIS. I'll close some of these here. Okay, safeguard document destruction. The vast majority of you said 1 termination for cause or default is bad. Well, they got 1. Right there. I believe that's Social Security. Termination for cause. All right, let's go take a look at FPDS NG. Mod 0, well, that can't be a termination for cause of default. There is no reason for mod on that. Let's take a look at P1. No termination for cause of default there. They're just working right away. Now, did Safeguard, is it another one that they had problems with? Well, I guess it wasn't so bad to terminate this contract, or that one might be done. I guess that finished in September. It looks like they didn't exercise an option. So I think the news out there, if you're a vendor community, is check your FAPIIS record. Make sure something didn't happen, a misfire on that chain reaction. Ella, do you have a comment?
Yes, I'm still on the poll. Doesn't matter.
Dang
It
nabbit.
didn't change.
Dang nabbit.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ella. I appreciate you raising your hand. Thank you. All right. So what did I do there? I was talking, just to quickly recap. So these false positives, they're in FAPIIS. They're not in FPDS NG. I grabbed that DUNS number. Let me put you on mute again. Thank you for pointing that out. So I grabbed that DUNS number and I went over to FAPIIS. And safeguard document destruction is terminated for cause according to FAPIIS on that PID. I then went over to FPDS NG. I plugged in that PID. Well, I know mod 0 doesn't have a reason for mod, so it's got to be this one. They're just working right away. There was no termination for cause or default according to FPDS NG. FPDS NG is the system of record. So if you're doing a contractor responsibility assessment on Safeguard, and like the vast majority of you see a termination for cause or default, that could give you a negative conclusion. In this case, it's false. Now, maybe they have another record out there. I don't know, but it wasn't that one. Another thing you'll see is just phantom records. So you'll come over here to FAPIIS, you'll search for a DUNS number, doing your contractor research. Okay, whoop, I got a red flag. All right, we got agriculture, it looks like, termination for cause. Let's go find that PID. PID's not there. So you see that a lot too. Not a lot, these are much less. All right, here's an interesting thing that I also think is going on. Let's look at this one here. I'll go to FAPIIS home. I look at this one. Again, this is false positive. So, okay, I got a record for termination for cause or default in FAPIIS. Let's go take a look at it in FPDS NG. Come down to the latest mod. No, that wasn't the one I wanted to look at. Let's look at the next. Well, let's sort this by sign date. There we go. P3, they have it terminated for convenience. So I wonder if sometimes what happens is they get terminated for default or cause, they raise holy heck, and it ends up getting changed to terminate for convenience in FPDS NG, but they don't back out the FAPIIS record. Okay, I mentioned we have that report that you can get from us, vendor report at FedDataCheck.net. put the DUNS number in the subject line. I really hope you try it. It's open to anybody with a gov or mil address, gov.gov.mil address. I'd really appreciate it if you would just do a test one and pass it on to your colleagues, see what you think. But we also have a report now that in FedDataCheck, for those of you who are subscribers, and I think we have some people from transportation with us today. So we'll take a look there. So here I am, I'm gonna log into FedDataCheck. I'll log in as a transportation user. I will click on transportation. And I will go to risk analysis, FAPIIS versus FPDS NG. Hit OK. I'll select all agencies within transportation, maritime, federal highways, FAA. Okay, so one of the things on this is we're only matching by the PID. So I don't care about the ref PID. You can if you want to make it even more exacting. I'm just saying, hey, they got a PID they've identified in FAPIIS as terminated for cause of default. Is it also in FPDS NG? So here's one, like we said, this would be a false positive. It's in FAPIIS, it's not in FPDS NG. And then here are the ones, false negatives. They're in FPDS NG, but they have not made their way into FAPIIS yet. You can also export this. It'd be good to set this to setting to no. Say you're in acquisition policy and oversight. I could come here and hit export to Excel. Should be coming up here in just a second. Let's see where that. There we go. So here's my Excel export. I could save that, and I know I want to send an email attach this and send an email to Brandon and send some emails to these people here saying, hey, you know, we got some important responsibility assessment documentation to do. Let's see if these, let's see if we've gone through the chain reaction on our terminations for cause or default. Double check that. Yeah, so you have the option of checking the PID and ref PID combination. By default, I just did the PID. You will see a termination, you will see a record in FAPIIS with just the PID. So they lift off the ref PID. I don't know how that happens. Sometimes it's in reverse order. But here's some things to do if you're not a FedDataCheck subscriber and you wanted to check the FAPIIS data against FPDS NG data. I'm coming to the end of it, but you can slide 13. I give you some tips on how you would do that. Really, the first thing to do, the trickiest thing to do, to get the termination for cause of default out of FPDS NG, you need to develop an ad hoc report. We're going to be going through that on December 5th. That's going to be a webinar. You can join us for that. And to get the FAPIIS data, it's a little tricky. So if I wanted to pull down every single FAPIIS record there is, you go to data reports, all FAPIIS records, search, description and usage. Wait while this page is loading. So you can see it's a lot of clicks, and I have that documented in that slide. I'm waiting here. And then you click here. That downloads all FAPIIS records into Excel. So if you wanted to pull out everything in FAPIIS, administrative records, we saw you're not paying your subcontractors, but also the termination for cause of default records in FAPIIS. That's where you get it. You got to go through a bunch of clicks, and then they give you the opportunity. All right, in review. Tie whether you use terminations for cause or termination for default to the commercial item acquisition procedures if you want to be precise. Using FAPIIS to check for terminations for cause default is a hit or miss proposition. Data's just not there in FAPIIS. Doesn't sync up with FPDS NG. It only does so about 50% of the time. There are two better ways. Create an FPDS NG ad hoc report that accepts the DUNS number as a parameter. More to come on December 5th. You'll get information on that webinar. What I think is the best way, I'm biased, of course, send an email to vendorreport@FedDataCheck.net. Just put the DUNS number in the subject line. You can look at all the FAPIIS data and FPDS NG data side by side regarding terminations for cause and default, as well as additional information for your responsibility assessment. I'm 1 minute over. Okay. Ella, I'm assuming we already talked, I believe. I got that, still seeing the poll, still seeing the question. I did get a question here. What modification reason should we choose for a purchase order cancellation under FAR 13302-4? Anybody have I don't know. So you got a cancellation under FAR 13302-4. What reason for mod should you pick? Madison, I don't know. Incidentally, that's the end of the webinar. If I can unmute you, Madison, I can't. Mary Rainey, can you send a copy of the slides? I'm going to do that. Yep. All right, I'm going to go through who I am and who what FedDataCheck is, Potomac Wave. That's the end of the webinar. If you are interested in what I do and what my team, the team I work with does, stay on. Otherwise, we'll see you in 2 weeks we're going to get into terminations for cause versus default. That might be a shorter webinar based on what we said today. It doesn't. We got 3 people on the FedDataCheck team for Potomac Wave, myself, Brian Yost, who many of you know, Keith Langley. We're going to have a 4th person on Monday. Brian Farrell is going to be joining us. So we're looking forward to that. We have a YouTube channel. We have not been keeping it up to date. I'm determined to do that now. So we're going to start putting more of these webinars up there. We have not been doing it, but if you could subscribe to that channel, we would appreciate it. It helps us get a unique URL. We did win an award, I have to say. And we have the dinner next Thursday from Washington Technology. We're very happy about that, I have to say. If you wanted to do a trial of FedDataCheck, $5,000 trial for 4 months is available. Get you through some of those websites, alerts, a lot of those things we went through today and more. And if you just wanted the vendor responsibility assessment reports, vendor report at FedDataCheck.net, put the DUNS number in the subject line. We can give you separate pricing for that. CLP point for attending the webinar today. I'll send that out a little bit later today, maybe tomorrow morning. We're a women-owned small business mostly, so we're starting to fade off of that and go to an OTSB. In fact, we won our first OTSB full and open competition award just recently. It is under protest. "11 agencies subscribe to us. HUD joined us. We're very happy about that. Anyone, I think we saw a few people from HUD today. So that was great. And we do a lot more than just data quality metrics, which is one of our first things we've done. As you saw, we're now comparing FPDS NG and FAPIIS data, service contract inventory reporting, that came up with education. We do a lot with competitive one bid rates and competition rates, helping acquisition departments lower their one bid rate, increase their competition rate as appropriate. Automation in the annual FPDS NG verification and validation review. That's another big one that about half of our subscribers use us for. That's it. I am done. I would appreciate any comment or Dale, I see you raised your hand, but I don't have a phone number for you. You didn't dial in on the phone that I could see. Next 2 weeks, termination for cause versus default. 2 weeks after that will be ad hoc reporting. And then in January, my tentative plan is the non-manufacturer rule. That's going to be a lot. Thanks for everyone. Thanks for attending. Great. Really appreciate the interest. I thought we had a good sized crowd today, which is great. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. See ya.